My first sales role, I had a bunch of men that I worked with who were still to this day are some of my biggest champions. They taught me everything. They took me out to customers. They helped with all the silly questions that I had, and they helped build my confidence. And I still look at the relationship I have with those men now and think if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had the confidence to go forward. So I think we need to have more men and women fostering those STEM ambitions at school and at university. When people start in their careers, help them. Like, remember what it was like when you first started and help them get through it, men and women. Some of the young men that I've helped over the years as well who've been a little bit not so confident, you just lean in and help them and you show that empathetic leadership.
Welcome to the She Sells podcast. Today, I have Katrina Ablett with me from Adobe. So welcome, Katrina.
Thank you, Sarika.
Nice
to meet you.
I'm really excited to talk to you and get into the layers of conversation that we've got set up, but I'd love to understand your job title. It's kind of a unique job title. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, my role at Adobe is Chief of Staff to the President of APAC in Japan. Big title, sounds really fancy, and I have a lot of people go, ooh, when they hear that. To me, I kind of classify it a little bit of as a special projects kind of role.
Okay.
So anything that the business needs to dive into how it's performing, or we need to look at different areas of the business, then I'll help with that. So it's a really fluid role, and I really enjoy that part of it, actually.
Yeah. And there was a component of it that said go to market. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think it's aligned with the president of our sales organisation, so it's all about go-to-market. So my background has been in sales operations and strategy and how we go to market as a company. I've only been with Adobe for 8 months, but, you know, prior to that, my experience has all been in how we go to market within APAC countries and regions. Yeah. So it's about looking into those aspects of the business as well, how we're selling, what parts of the sales teams are performing and not performing.
That's really interesting because, like, when I look on LinkedIn, the people and their job titles, it's actually quite rare that you get go-to-market in the job title. So I found that really interesting when I first connected with you. Part of your role at Adobe, I think that what's really interesting there is that you're in this leadership role. And I've seen from your career that you've been in many different interesting organizations and a real play on sort of that tech and data side of things. So I'd love to understand a bit more about being a female in leadership, and do we think that there's enough women in sales and in sales leadership?
Yeah, great question. That's a really, really big question with a lot of answers that could come from it. The short answer, no, absolutely not. However, what I've really noticed at Adobe is just how many women in leadership there are across the entire company. Yeah. I've just come back from our global customer event called Summit in Vegas, and there was the second day keynote had everybody on stage was a woman except for one, which was a man. And we all commented on it. And it was people from all aspects. They were doing demos. Our CMO was on there talking as well. And so I've really noticed a lot of women in leadership at Adobe. In previous companies, not so much. You know, I've seen it's taken 2 or 3 layers down in the organisation before you have any women, which is a real shame. And whilst there was a conversation around that needing to happen, there was no real conscious effort to move the needle, I think. So it's very different depending on what company you're in, I think, as well.
And what do you think Adobe does differently, if there's a way to pinpoint some characteristics of an organization like Adobe versus perhaps other places you've been? How do they champion women? Is there something that they do actively?
Yeah, great question. I think, as I said, I've been there 8 months and it was immediately obvious to me the minute I walked in the door. I would attend meetings where there were 14 people in the meeting and 12 of them were women. And I've never, ever in almost 30 years of my career been in that situation. So I have looked into it a lot. And I think early on there was a conscious effort to have women in APAC in leadership roles. Our CFO is a woman. Our head of employee experience or HR is a woman. Our head of ANZ sales is a woman. Our head of India sales is a woman. Wow. And so you have a lot in the leadership team that are women. And then, of course, myself coming into the chief of staff role as well. So I think they've consciously done that. And then I think that just becomes the norm. And it paves the way for more people to see. They can look and say, hey, I can do that too. You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah, I really love that. It sounds like it's become part of the culture to foster and champion women and to enable that path as well. So that's really fantastic to hear. You've been in the role for 8 months. What do you think that companies could do to attract and retain female sales talent, especially in tech? There's not a lot of women in this space. And I wondered if you've seen that across the years that you've been in the space.
Yeah, for sure. The last 2 companies I've been at have been startups. And, I've joined early on in the APAC and Japan marketplace. So we've had to consciously think about our diversity hiring. And when I talk about diversity, I don't just think women and men. I think age, I think backgrounds, I think nationalities, all of the diversity.
Absolutely.
But, it's quite common that you start with the gender diversity as being the first point of call. And it has to be a conscious effort. You have to have at least 2 women in the candidacy for each role. Otherwise, statistics have shown that you're not going to hire a woman if you've just got one against a bunch of men. So I think you have to consciously make that effort. And then it becomes, again, coming back to the what you can see you want to be piece, is actually having the women that are in the business be the voice of the business as well. So having them up on stage, at kickoff events, or having them going out talking to customers, customer events and those sorts of things as well, and just being really visible. To do that, it can be really hard because not every woman wants to be that, flagship female hire. But so they need that champion. They need somebody to actually, back them and maybe push them into it if they're not so confident, give them the confidence to do that and go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently posted on LinkedIn about this Harvard Business Review. And in the study, it showed that women who might have 6 out of 10 attributes for a role, I think it was the men who had 6 out of 10.
Yes.
They would still go for it.
Yes.
Whereas women would have probably 8 or 9 and they still would feel hesitant to put their hat in the ring because they felt like they weren't adequate. And so I think that plays a lot into this idea that females generally have more imposter syndrome.
For sure.
How do you feel about that? Do you see it yourself?
Oh, absolutely. And I experience it pretty much every day. So, and I hate the term. I kind of hate feeling like we almost rely on that or fall back on that as a reason, but it is so real. And, yourself, I said to you that why would anybody want me to be on a podcast and why would you want to hear my ideas about things? And I think everybody feels that along the way, there's something that why me? Why would you want to talk to me? Why would you want to hear from me? That sort of thing. And I think I've only managed to overcome that through age and experience, I think. Still every day in meetings think, oh, should I ask that question? And now it's like, whatever, who cares what people think of me? I'm going to ask that question. But early on in my career, there is no way I would have asked that question. So it's experience and it's age and it's confidence for a lot of women. Having said that, I have noticed a lot of the younger women sort of coming up through the ranks of sales now, so much more confident than I ever was. And, I ran into one at the airport on Thursday night in LA. Haven't seen her for 2 years. She's just doing amazing things with her career. And she's 20 years younger than me, Nellie, and I want to be her when I grow up, I want to be those girls that are coming up through the ranks now. They're so much more confident than we ever were.
But I do think that the generation that we're seeing come through, I'm really both excited and looking forward to seeing how that paves the way, because I think that with the guests that we've had on the show, we've very much had to go through a different world. It's a different era of things that we've had to go through that have paved the way for the next generation to come through. My only hope was that it was done a lot quicker, but here we are. I do want to touch into the sales teams that you have worked with. And what do you feel like top performing sales team do different to perhaps average sales teams?
I think there's a couple of things. One would be primarily they are customer focused. So they're listening to the customer, they're thinking about what the customer wants. They're wanting to help the customer solve a problem, not sell to a customer. So I think they're very customer focused. And I think secondly, it's about the teaming aspect. So then it's not, there's a good saying that we used to have in where I worked once where it was we win and lose as a team. And I think that that's when you get high performing teams is it's not every person in it for themselves. They're in it for the team outcome and the customer outcome. So everybody's really clear up front on what the outcomes are that they're wanting for the customer. You know, what problem are they solving? What are they going after? Who's responsible for each part of that, right from the early prospecting stage of working with the customer right through to post-sales when you're doing value realization and helping the customer gain value out of whatever it is you've sold them.
Yeah.
Because then that starts the circle again for hopefully an upsell or something.
I actually have 2 questions around this now because you just come back from Vegas.
Yes.
And you said that was your first customer-focused event that you've been to. So tell me a bit about that. What felt different about it?
Just hearing from customers themselves. So usually when I've been to Vegas maybe 10 times, and generally it's a sales kickoff or something like that. This was the first real customer event that I've been to where I've been in the vendor side. And I've spent 8 months at Adobe trying to learn the products, trying to understand what we do. There's a lot of complexity there, trying to figure out how it all ties together. What I learned in 2.5 days in Vegas from listening to customers and how they use our products was, I could have done that, with that 8 months ago for sure.
Right.
So I think there's nothing more valuable than listening to your customers and hearing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So there was that side of it as well, and just the excitement of talking to customers and actually thinking outside rather than looking inside as well.
That's fantastic. And you were talking about the sales, I guess, the end-to-end and, really understanding the pain points and getting on the same team so far as we're one team, we've got one common goal. How does marketing tie into that?
Yeah, I think it's critical for that first initial part of the cycle. The very first part is figuring out what customers you want to go after, right? You can't just go out and do a blanket marketing campaign across the board to everybody. So you want to make sure you know exactly who your customer, how you're going to segment your customer base and who you're going to go after. And then you make sure that you've got marketing campaigns or alignment to each of those segments. They will all be different. So I think it's really critical for that initial part to make sure they've got the right messaging going out. And then people often overlook the end piece, which is the reference stories and how are the customers using the product or whatever it is you're selling, to actually then be able to start that cycle again, to have that conversation around this customer is doing this great thing, you could do that too.
It sounds like a really strong sort of feedback loop all the way through to post-sales.
For sure.
And retention, and really understanding the case studies. I mean, from conversations that we've had on the podcast, as well as outside of the podcast, there's a lot of pain or struggle around the 2 divisions working quite in silos, essentially, separately. And they're not necessarily combining activities to build one revenue team. Are there any strategies or things that you've seen work really well, not just at Adobe, in which that enables those 2 teams to come together and feel like they're not against each other?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think, there's a reason why there's all those memes that exist about sales versus marketing, right? You see them everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it starts with the top. It always starts with the management. If marketing and sales are seen to be partnering at a management level, then it's going to flow down through.
Yep.
I've seen some marketers in companies that I've worked in that have just been so great at thinking about partnering with sales and proving the value to sales. And I've seen salespeople who go, can you just get me a T-shirt? And that's how they see marketing. So you really need to have the sales leader and the marketing leader working well together to prove the value of the partnership and then have that flow down through the layers as well. So, good examples are just making it beyond that T-shirt or that, swag sell to the salespeople.
It's interesting that you say that it needs to come from the top down. That's definitely been a pattern that we've seen in conversations. So has that come down to the mindset of the leadership? Does it come down to experience? How do we break down those walls? What kind of leadership do we need to foster that?
Yeah, it definitely comes down to the mindset of the leadership. If they see the war, if they see us and them, it's never going to go down through the ranks if they don't feel it as well. So I think it's just so important for collaboration to hire collaborative leaders so that they foster that right from the get-go. Any leader needs to be collaborative across all parts of the organisation.
Yeah. What do we feel like the key in getting sales and marketing truly aligned? Have you felt any sort of strategies that have worked really well? Or
I often feel that it comes down to other teams to get involved in that as well. So in my chief of staff role now, I see my role as being a little bit of bringing people together. And if marketing are telling me that they don't know how to speak to sales or vice versa, then I'll be the one that will bring them together if they're having trouble. So I feel like there is a role to play for other teams in the organisation. Again, they should all be collaborative leaders. So everybody should be keeping an eye out to make sure that everybody's working together. If you have empathetic leadership and you have collaborative leadership, then teams will automatically start to work together, and you'll have people fostering those relationships too.
And I think that you need that person in the organisation or persons that become the glue between sales and marketing, and understand, like, if we work together, we're going to generate so much more revenue and collaboration and amazing work. It's not just about spitting out another brochure for the sales team. And you talked about segmentation. Is there a process in which you go through to segment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Every organisation will do it roughly the same, but also different levels of complexity. So depending on the size of the team that they have working on it. So it's usually sales operations or sales strategy that will work on the segmentation. So it always has to be data driven. So you need to make your hypotheses on what you think from having worked in a region or a country or a city or whatever it may be, an industry. Make that hypothesis, but then test it with the data. So there are so many data companies out there that can give you data around companies and, what they're currently using from a software or hardware or services perspective, and then you run your analysis against those. So mostly, in any fiscal year planning cycle that I've been in, that sort of data-driven exercise can take anywhere from 2 months to 4 months to actually do to get it right.
And it's crazy to me how many businesses miss that work. They don't put in the time and the effort. And, sometimes I'm just asking for a 2-hour workshop to understand the ICP of one segment. And that can be really difficult just to get the right people in the room. And sometimes it's so hard to get both sales and marketing to be there to work on this together. But I think that when we're talking about, there's so much technology out there, data platforms and sales enablement and data research intent, buyer intent, etc. I feel like we are hearing that sales teams in particular have a lot in their tech stacks. Are you feeling that as well? And are tech stacks being quite overloaded?
For sure. Absolutely. I think you have to be really deliberate about what tools you provide to your salespeople to make them successful. And a lot of people go, oh, shiny thing, I'm going to go buy that now. And I'm going to buy this shiny thing. And then the two conflict or don't talk to one another. And you've got your BDRs using one system that your salespeople can't see the pipeline coming in from, and that makes life really hard for everybody involved. So I think it's really important to have somebody who owns the tech stack, who can make sure, and when I say somebody, it might be a team or multiple people, but we'll call it a somebody, who owns that tech stack, who makes sure that everything can talk to one another. There will be a time where you have to make a call to say, this isn't working for us anymore. Let's see what else is out there, rather than get something else in, replace, rather than duplicate.
Some of these technologies are not cheap.
No.
Especially if they're bought on a seat basis. But being the person responsible for deciding what technologies, I think that's quite a big job, isn't it?
It sure is. And I think you can't do it on your own, obviously. You need to do some discovery and find out what's working and what's not working. Go talk to other companies. Some of the great work we've done over the years has been by going and talking to our competitors and seeing what they're using and just having a grown-up conversation with them. I know we're competitors, but what are you seeing? What are we seeing? And have that sort of a conversation as well. And I think that helps. And I think with all the AI tools coming out now, that's going to make life a lot more complicated from a tech stack perspective, but a lot easier for people to use the tools as well, like, using natural language to ask the questions that you may have ordinarily have taken, half an hour or so to run some data points, and now you're just using a sentence is quite groundbreaking, I think. And the people who are managing the tech stack need to keep on top of all of that as well.
Have you got a top 3 at the moment so far as tech that you are really seeing enabling your sales team and marketing to push the needle further, like at the moment?
Yeah, well, I would be remiss of me not to mention Adobe, given I just came back from our summit where I saw so many amazing things that we were unveiling, which in my previous roles in sales ops, I would have just blown my mind with what you could do around just taking some data that's in an analytical document with graphs and things and popping it straight into a PowerPoint presentation for you with speaker notes. You know, there are tools like that are coming out, and there's a lot around Adobe that I just find so much easier to use. Another one is, you know, like our Acrobat. I did something recently where I was doing some discovery calls across the region, and I recorded on Teams. I recorded our conversations on, you know, put a transcript so that I wouldn't have to crazy type, you know, write notes and things the whole time. I had 4 different transcripts that came out of that. I ran them through the Adobe Acrobat Assistant, and it provided me a summary of the 4 documents, what was common themes across all of those, and what were the actions across all of them as well. And I could just do that through while I was on the plane on the way to Vegas. So things like that are quite amazing. It have just come out of working for Databricks, and the tooling and that is incredible. We ran our whole business on our own product, and it's been a long time since I've worked for a company where we've run our whole business on our product that we own. That just a single source of truth for everything was so great.
It's amazing. In terms of one sales tech that you can't live without, is there one that you use on a daily basis, or you've seen it's been really adaptive for you?
Well, I guess a CRM system is the one. The CRM system from a sales perspective that takes you right from end to end. You can't survive without a CRM system. So I've always had Salesforce in my life as a sales ops person. So I love the Salesforce product. You know, I have sort of dabbled in some of the other CRMs, but not enough to know them. So because I know Salesforce inside out, I find that really easy to use.
I have heard, though, that Salesforce has its limitations.
It does.
And that a lot of companies use Salesforce and HubSpot side by side.
Yeah, right.
Is that the case for you?
I haven't used both of those together. We have got 2 CRM systems at Adobe as well. So, for a similar thing. And, you know, at other companies as well, there's limitations on what you can report on. That's where I think that there could be some improvement.
What do you think the biggest mistake companies make when selling to enterprise clients in the B2B space? Because we break down the buyer journey, right? And from our business point of view, in terms of untapped space, we look at the larger end of town and we select 50 accounts, right? So this is an account-based marketing approach. And I'm always looking at ways to try and improve that, and have seen, you know, like I said before, that spending time segmenting is so important. But what do you feel like is the biggest mistake in enterprise sales that you've seen over the years?
I think the biggest mistake would be trying to sell your product rather than trying to solve the customer's problem. So coming back to what I said earlier around not listening to the customer. So thinking, I've got a product to sell, I want to sell it this particular way, but it might not suit and it might not fit. And that's where you go through the sales cycle and you get to the point where you think, my customer's about to buy, and then all of a sudden, oops, they don't. And if you haven't really understood their problem, it gets to this, you know, the C-suite for their approval, and they're, why would we buy this? It's not solving a problem. It's a product. So I think it's about making sure that you are selling a solution to a problem rather than just trying to peddle your products.
And do you feel like there are any particular hurdles to doing that with the way in which we have the ability to sell to anyone around the world, right? So we could approach people via email or LinkedIn or a phone call, or, you know, then there's the ads and everything else. Are you seeing anything in particular that is perhaps declining in the sales team being able to get cut through? And are you seeing anything in particular picking up?
That's an interesting question, that one. So I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, from a sales team trying to, you know, sort of make that solution sell is their own pressure. So their own quotas that they've got to meet and their own targets that they've got to meet. And they just, if they're not considerate and thoughtful about how they approach their customers and they're just going out there and trying to sell just to hit a number. I think that can be one of the biggest hurdles for sales teams, and going back to that point where they just go and try and do it all themselves without bringing the team in and thinking about it. So you really have to be really considerate around your account planning, what the specific customers you are targeting. You don't have to go after every single customer. You've got to go after the right customers.
Yeah.
And it might not be the right time for a certain customer in a certain industry just yet. You think about a country like India, they are a developing country. They're still going through building their infrastructure. There might be a lot of people there and they might have a lot of need for technology, but they are building their infrastructure before they're going to be buying a lot of their other, your products that sit on top of all of that.
Yeah.
So you've got to be patient to say, well, who are the customers we can target in that market now, but who are the ones that we want to think about having the conversation with now to set them up for maybe a sale in a year or even 2 years' time. We have deliberately gone after customers knowing that the sale would be 2 or 3 years away, and structured the salesperson's comp plan accordingly. Say, right, we want you to be in this for the long run.
Yeah.
We know they're not going to purchase from us for a while, but we need to set the scene now, and we need to bring the customer with us on that journey and figure out exactly what they need. And there's an element of patience there for that as well.
It's so true. I actually read a piece of research recently how sales cycles have just got that much longer.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere between 7 months and 18 months that these deals are taking at the moment to get over the line. So you talked about roughly, make a plan for a 1 or 2 year sales cycle.
Yeah.
How do you keep the account that you're targeting interested or warm over such a long period of time?
It's really hard because traditionally, we come from a background where there's 6-month comp plans and year-long comp plans, and customers know when your end of quarter are and or end of quarter is, and your end of half is, and your end of year is, and they know what's going to motivate you. So I think you have to have the right salesperson who's going to be that relationship builder and have the conversations with the right levels of the organisation at the right time and bring in your people as well at the right time. And it's a real mind shift with getting the company to support having a salesperson who will be not earning a lot of money for the first year or so and then starting to pay back their dues. That's a real challenge that I don't think a lot of companies are getting their heads around just yet. Like I said, we've had 6-month comp plans, but a 9-month sales cycle, and that kind of is really hard to weigh up as well.
I mean, you can't go do a degree in sales, relationship building and selling and account management. No. I actually don't know if that actually exists. So realistically, you are learning on the job. And, we hear a lot that people really don't see sales as a profession, but yet it's probably one of the most complex roles that you could have, because you have to have, the empathy and the psychology and the tenacity to keep going and motivation to keep pushing forward and build that relationship. And then you've got the pressure of the numbers. And, making sure that you're hitting target and quota and having all the pressures on that side, and then keeping your notes updated and being on top of the tech. And there's so much noise in that space. Do you have any advice around that for people that are in sales that maybe feel that pressure and that they can't quite grasp how to maintain their numbers and also still focus on building the relationship?
Yeah. So glad you brought that up, because I've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of weeks about how I don't think anybody goes into university or comes out of school thinking, I'm going to be a tech salesperson. That's what I want to do. I certainly didn't. I wanted to be a computer programmer. And that's how I started out. So I think that it is something you absolutely have to learn on the job. So my advice would be to use that team around you. Always be curious and always be asking, and never be afraid to say, I don't know how to do this. Most companies will have the resources like sales enablement, the marketing piece, their first line manager, second line manager, whoever it may be. Use the people around you who've been there before and done it and can teach you. And I think the best sales people that I've seen who've done that have really been curious, have really gone out there and said, I'm going to make every single person in this organisation work for me to help me be successful. Yeah. And whether that be that they want to be up on stage presenting a demonstration to 12,000 people, or they want to just, be a customer success manager who's working, with the customer after the sale, and they want to be an expert in just this one product or whatever it may be. Just use the people around you to help you get what you need out of it as well, but do it in a respectful way as well.
Yeah. So based off the back of that, with sales being quite a complex role, and from what I've seen and heard that it's quite male dominated, especially in tech sales, and that's not just in Australia, that's across the board. What do you feel like we could be doing as female leaders, as well as, non-female leaders, just leaders in general, to help enable more women to apply for that role, to go for it, and not feel like the stereotype that it's going to be that bro culture, and that it is intense, but there are much more of a focus on the relationship side of things?
I think it comes right back to the fundamentals or the early days of your learning. So women in STEM, or girls in STEM in particular, so it comes right back to high school, I think, and uni. So I started my thoughts about being in an IT profession when I was 10 years old. My brother said to me, you should be a computer programmer. If you could earn $50,000 a year if you be a computer programmer. And I said, okay, I will. And that was it. So for my whole high school and the whole time I was at high school, I wanted to be a programmer. I loved programming. That was IT to me.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to get into a degree at uni called Business Systems at Monash. It had a scholarship component where we worked in industry in 2 6-month blocks. So my first one was programming. Again, I loved it, really enjoyed talking to the people around me, thought this is fantastic. Then my second stint was at IBM in the software marketing team. And this whole world of IT and tech just opened up in front of me, where I was like, IT and tech is not just programming, it's all these other things. And I was so lucky to have a woman who was kind of my mentor during that time, who then kept me on. I didn't leave IBM for 17 years after that first 6-month stint. Because I had mentors, I had opportunities, I was provided with so many different flexibility options through all of my having children and taking time off and that sort of thing. But this one woman in particular, whose name was Julia, she worked full time. Her husband was a stay-at-home dad. We ended up replicating that in our lives. My husband stayed home with the kids for the first sort of 10 years or so. And I was afforded the flexibility to go and sort of work on my career because he did that. We chose to do that as a family. But if I go right back, I didn't think I wanted to be in sales. I didn't see that. And if I hadn't have had some sort of a background or desire to be in STEM, then I wouldn't have ended up coming into a sales role. If I didn't have that Julia as my mentor, I would not have had the confidence to go and do the things that I did. My first sales role, I had a bunch of men that I worked with who were still to this day are some of my biggest champions. They taught me everything. They took me out to customers. They helped with all the silly questions that I had, and they helped build my confidence. And I still look at the relationship I have with those men now and think, again, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had the confidence to go forward. So I think we need to have more men and women fostering those STEM ambitions at school and at university. And then, when people start in their careers, help them. Like, remember what it was like when you first started and help them get through it, men and women. Some of the young men that I've helped over the years as well who've been a little bit not so confident, you just lean in and help them. And you show that empathetic leadership.
Confidence doesn't have any barriers, right?
Yeah.
Everyone can have different levels of confidence. And in terms of, you're saying that you had an amazing mentor and a part of that, and then also the men who also supported you and brought you through. I guess, what advice would you give to someone who's in tech, considering the sales side of things? And what was the turning point for you, actually, to take that leap into the sales side of things?
Good question, because my stint at IBM was in software marketing, and then my graduate year, I was sort of in the sales, but we were testing. You were allowed to sort of test out where you wanted to go. And at the end of that year, I said, I want to be a solution consultant. Or a solution engineer. I want to go do tech. And my manager at the time said, I think you'd be really good in sales. I think you should look at that. And I just went, okay. And I was great at relationship selling. So I worked with small to medium business customers, made some really great relationships with my customers, sold quite a lot of product to them, and went to President's Club, all of those sorts of things. But then the style of selling changed, and it was very much more cutthroat, much more, to a budget that we had, not the budget that the customer had. And I didn't feel comfortable with that style of sale. I went through, some training, probably not a lot of training from the psychological side. By then you were doing a lot of the product training, not the how to sell training.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't comfortable with that type of sale, and ultimately decided selling wasn't for me for that reason. Now it's a lot more about the relationship. It's a lot more about understanding the industry, understanding the customer, understanding how things have been done before to replicate. So I think if you're thinking about sales and you have a passion for learning, that's what's going to make you successful, and building those relationships with people as well.
Yeah, I know that you mentioned you have a daughter.
Yes.
Would you ever recommend to your daughter you should consider sales?
Oh gosh, not her, because she's not that type of person.
Yeah.
Currently, she wants to be a lawyer.
Okay.
So maybe not so much for her, but I would recommend that she looks at finding the industry, or girls look at the industry as a whole and not just think it's one thing. It can be so many different things.
Definitely. Well, I really have enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you.
And I would just love to understand, if people wanted to reach out to you, connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. Probably LinkedIn. Yeah, just Katrina Ablett at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I would love that.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.